The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ, according to Mark. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of James and Salome bought spices so that they might go and anoint Jesus. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. And all that had been commanded them they told briefly to those around Peter. And afterward, Jesus himself sent out through them from east to west the sacred and imperishable proclamation of eternal salvation. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Christ. Let us pray. May the words of my mouth, the meditations of our hearts be always acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our salvation. Amen. Amen. Please be seated. Well, I'd like to begin this morning with a rather awkward question. And that question is this: is what we're doing here today, gathering in a building, going through a service based on ancient books, singing some ancient songs, engaging in a highly ritualized meal where we take of some little pieces of bread and a little sip of wine, was this really Jesus' grand vision? Now, we know that Jesus lived. We might not know for sure a whole bunch of other things, but historically there's little doubt that there was a Jesus and that Jesus lived. There's little doubt that Jesus had a certain teaching and that he was killed for that teaching. Is a building and what goes on in that building for just a little portion of time each week the grand vision that motivated Jesus, that caused his heart to burn? Was this the vision for which he was willing to be killed? And it may surprise you to know that, in my opinion, and I could be wrong, I'm wrong about a bunch of things, and this could be one of them. But in my opinion, church, the way we so often think of church today, as a building and a service done in the building, never even crossed Jesus' radar. Now, let me be clear. I think this is important, and I couldn't follow Jesus faithfully without this. This is a tremendous help to me. But I don't think this was the be-all and the end-all of what Jesus was about. I don't think this was the most important part of his vision. I don't think this was his grand design for humanity. And further, I think a lot of what is done in church buildings is totally irrelevant to the vision of Jesus Christ and sometimes works dead against it. So what was the vision of Jesus? Well, the vision of Jesus, and this was unique, his vision was for a religion that was not tribal. And so before this, up to this point, religions were always tribal. They were national religions. They were racial religions. They divided people into classes and groups, and they set those groups one against one another. And Jesus' vision was for one human family. And so Jesus, he included in his followers not just Jews, but Romans, hated Romans. Jesus loved them. Gentiles hated Gentiles. Samaritans, people of an entirely different religion. People of no religion at all. Jesus didn't just include a certain class of people, the wealthy, the up-and-comers, the beautiful people, the people who could do something for you. but he included everybody. He didn't just include men, he included women. And he included women at the very heart of his movement. He didn't just include adults, but he included kids. And kids were really important to Jesus. He didn't just include the in-group, he included outcasts and sick people and social pariahs. Jesus' grand vision was that the world would be filled through and through with love. And that's what Jesus was all about. And so Jesus taught this very clearly. He said this, he said, all the law and all the prophets, in other words, the whole entire Bible. He said the whole entire Bible can be summarized like this: love God, love your neighbor. If you don't do those two things, if you don't love God, you don't love your neighbor, then it doesn't matter what else you do, wherever else you do it. It's not what what I'm about. It's not what God is looking for. And Jesus, just before he was crucified, the very last night of his life, he gathered his disciples together. He washes the feet of the disciples. And he says to the disciples when he's done, "You call me Lord and Master, for so I am." Jesus fully recognizing his authority. And he says, just as I've done for you, do this for one another. In other words, just as I've served you, you need to serve the people around you. And then he said, I give you this new commandment. And what he's saying there is, he's saying, if you don't do anything else, this is the one thing you must do. Nothing else. This is the one thing you must do. And that new commandment, love one another. Jesus could not have been clearer. The disciples understood this. Peter writes, love one another sincerely. Love one another from your heart. He says, love one another with a deep love. He got it. He understood that Christianity wasn't supposed to be an institution, something that happens an hour a week in a building, but was meant to be a movement that was fueled by love. The Apostle Paul, who writes most of the New Testament, he says, the only thing that counts is this. The only thing that counts is this. The only thing that counts, the only thing that matters is this. It's faith expressing itself in love. And if you don't love, it doesn't matter what else you do, what else you accomplish, where else you go. But that's not Jesus' dream for you. That's not God's design for you. That's not the best life has to offer. And early on, the early church got this. They understood this perfectly. An early Christian, a guy by the name of Justin Martyr, who was beheaded for his faith. Justin Martyr described the early Christians like this. He says, we who used to value the acquisition of wealth and possessions more than anything else now bring what we have into a common fund and share it with anyone who needs it. Not just Christians, anyone who needs it. We used to hate and destroy one another and refuse to associate with people with another race or country because they were involved in tribal religions. Now, because of Jesus, we live together with such people as one family, and we pray for our enemies. Historians tell us that the ancient Romans looked at Christians and they said, look at how these people love one another. And that wasn't a compliment. They said, look at how they're willing to care for each other. They're willing to give their lives for each other while we're willing to kill each other. And Rome was built on might. It was built on strength. It was built on glory. It was built on wealth. And so when Romans, and again, this is not from the Bible, this is from ancient historians. We know from ancient historians who write about this period. When the Romans would have a sick child, when they would have a girl rather than a boy, they'd just take them out to by night to the local trash heap, throw that child on the trash heap, because they weren't making for a stronger race. They weren't making for a stronger world. They weren't making for a more glorious army. And they'd take them out there and leave them there. And you know who would come in behind them and take those kids home? Christians. And so when Rome said, see how they love one another, that wasn't a compliment. They saw that as weakness. They saw that as working against the grand design, as working against the Roman Empire. And that's why Christians were persecuted and executed. And by the way, in just the last few years, a very, very well-known scientist, a scientist who has won the Nobel Prize, though he is admitted to be something of a live wire, he said that Christianity really has done a huge disservice to the human race. So it's not just the ancient Romans who said this. This is a recent scientist, very brilliant man, says Christianity has done a huge disservice to the human race because in the way it's cared for the sick and the weak and the lonely, it has worked against the design of evolution, which is the survival of the fittest and the strongest. And so, whereas evolution wants to produce a stronger, fitter, better person, we've worked against that because we care for the weak and the sickly and the lowly. And so the early church got that. The early church got that. But somewhere along the line, something changed. And the church was no longer known for love. And now it got all mixed up in politics. It got all mixed up in power struggles. It started to be concerned with money and wealth. And it got off track. One of the things got off track happened on October 28, 312. I'm sure you all know what happened on that date. That's the date when Constantine was going into battle to determine who would be the supreme emperor of Rome. And in the middle of the day, as he's going into battle, he sees a vision. You know the vision. And it's a vision of the cross up in the sky. And he either hears or reads in the sky these words, "In this sign, the sign of the cross, you shall conquer." And so he stops and he paints signs on the shields of his soldiers. They go into battle. He wins. He's victorious. And he, in thanksgiving to God, to the Christian God, he makes Christianity the legal religion of the Holy Roman Empire. The only problem is that it was far more Roman and empire than it was holy. And this has profound implications for the church. One of those, for instance, is that church properties dedicated to God, were no longer taxable. And so where before Christians gave of their wealth to care for those who were less needy for themselves, now Christianity became a way to amass more wealth. So people became Christians so they could dedicate their property to God and not pay taxes and become more wealthy. And whereas Christians had always hung out with the lowly, with the poor folks, now you begin to get this great distinction between the wealthy and the poor. Worse, there was a controversy. It's a controversy that I'm sure troubles all of you. It probably keeps you up at night as you wonder about this. Who is right? It was the Arian controversy. You remember this, right? In the Arian controversy, it was between a guy by the name of Athanasius and a guy by the name of Arius. And it concerned the word begotten in the creeds and what that really meant. And Athanasius won, Arius lost. And now because the church had become so associated with political power, the Emperor Constantine actually issued an edict, and that edict said that if anybody is found to have any of the writings of Arius at all, that person should be killed. And this is a radical departure. Now Christians aren't known for an excess of love. Now Christians are persecuted for what they believe. And now Christians stop loving one another, and they start killing one another. What matters isn't what you do, how you behave, whether you love one another. It's just what you believe. And you start to get this idea that as long as you believe certain things, as long as you say certain prayers, as long as you come to church, you're okay, and what you do doesn't matter. And nothing could have been further from the vision of Jesus. And maybe a final thing that happens then is that clergy, which were all men at this time, all men, these holy men are invested with this great power, and they become the gatekeepers of heaven and hell. They can decide who receives communion and who doesn't. They can decide who will be baptized and who won't be. They decide who can be excommunicated and who will still be allowed to come to church. And so now the church is no longer about love. This process, it starts fueled by love, almost comes to a grinding halt. The church is no longer about love. Now it's about control and conformity. It's about controlling what people believe and forcing them to conform to it. And And that's what it becomes about. It becomes about control and conformity, forcing people to conform to it. Just as just an example of this, the belief was propagated that if a child was not baptized, that child was going to go to hell. So in other words, the belief was propagated that if a child didn't have some water sprinkled on the child's head, it determined whether the child was going to spend the rest of eternity in heaven or in hell. When Jesus himself said, "Let the little children come to me," whether they're baptized or not, let the little children come to me. You see that emphasis on control and conformity. What it did is it made people conform, but they did so because they were scared. It made people scared, and it made people scarred, because the very people that needed the church to care for them, people who were divorced, for instance, found the church saying to them, "You're not welcome here." And so it left people scared and scarred. But the Protestants don't get off any better, because we come into the Reformation. And when we come to the Reformation, the Protestants said, well, the church is corrupt, church authority is corrupt, so we need to go back to the authority of Scripture. Scripture alone, they said, Scripture is going to be our authority. And then they spoke of being armed with the Scriptures. And there's the problem right there, armed with the Scripture. Scripture became a weapon. And people started to beat one another over the head with the Bible, and they haven't stopped doing it since. And the church broke into 6 different denominations. Now there's over 1,000 different denominations. And there's not just denominations, but there's non-denominations. And in non-denominations, what happens is a single man steps up and he says, all those other Christians throughout all the world and throughout all eternity who are doing things way are wrong. And I'm the only guy who knows how to do this right. And again, it's men who are saying this. So I need everybody to follow me in my way of doing things. So you don't just get denominations, you get single-man churches, non-denominational churches. What divides everybody? Is it love? No, it's this approach to Scripture that sees it as a weapon. No longer is Christianity known for an excess of love or compassion, but now it's known for its self-righteousness, its smugness, its judgmentalism, its hypocrisy. But that's not the end of the story. Because the end of the story is there are still churches that are dedicated to the original vision of Jesus Christ, that this world would one day be one human family and that it would be filled through and through with love. And I just want to say this morning, and I believe this from the very top of my head to the tip of my bones, that St. Matthew's is one of those churches. We are as committed can be to the original vision of Jesus Christ, that we'd all be ones, that we would not be broken down into tribes, political and Democrat and Republican, liberal and conservative, Catholic and Protestant, this and that, but that we would be one human family. And that there's enough hatred and discouragement in the world that we would do our part to fill this world through and through with love. And we think that vision is worthy of everything we can give it. And that's why, for instance, every week we feed 258 kids in our backpack program. There's kids who receive money receive food from the schools during the week, but the weekend they don't have food, and so we send backpacks home for them for the weekend. Hard to believe in the wealthiest county in the wealthiest country in the world that there's kids that don't have food, but there are. Now, believe it or not, the Backpack Buddies program is expensive. Costs us about $1,000 a week on top of donations. And this year, donations have been down a little bit. Giving has been down a little bit. We don't know why. It may be because people gave so generously at the end of the year. But we trust that when people have a chance, they'll make that right. And if people can't make it right, that's okay. God will bring other people who can give where other people couldn't. We trust God will provide. But we were faced with a decision. Do we cut back on the lunches we give kids? We give them 2 milks and one juice. Well, maybe we should just give them 1 milk and 2 juices. Not nutritionally good, but cheaper. We give them 2 high-quality proteins. Well, maybe we only give them 1 more high-quality protein and another starch. Nutritionally, not very good, but hey, it's cheaper. Or do we say we can't feed 258? It's just too much for a church our size. We can't afford it. We need to get rid of some of those kids. And I was so proud of the vestry. The vestry is the governing body of this church. When they said, we will not do any of those things. Because if Jesus was here, He'd love those kids. And He'd care for those kids. And He wouldn't care what it took. He wouldn't give them poorer meals. He wouldn't say, we can't take care of you. And so folks said, we're going to continue to feed kids like we've always feeding kids. And if there's more kids that are out there that need it, you bring them to us because we'll care for them too. That's the vision of Jesus Christ. And that's the vision that we as a church are deeply committed to. And so it's my hope this morning, and what I'm saying, and let me just be crystal clear about this. I am not saying that St. Matthew's is particularly great. I'm not. What I am saying is Jesus Christ is great. And I am saying that the vision of Jesus, the vision of one human family, a world filled through and through, is entirely worthy of you and entirely worthy of all of us and everything that we can give it. And if you're looking for like-minded people who are dedicated to that vision, who put their money where their mouth is, who put their time where their mouth is, who put their personal gifts and resources where their mouth is, then, in the words of somebody whose vision was remarkably aligned with the vision of Jesus Christ, I hope one day you'll join us and the world will be as one. Amen. Amen.